Q&A is something we do every summer. It's really, the point is for you, all of you, to ask any of us, not all together, but one at a time, questions. So it's interesting for me, having done this now for, I guess this is the 9th year. Certain kinds of questions come up over and over again. But just in thinking about things during the year of isolation, which is what I call COVID, I usually start by asking my dear colleagues here questions that I've been thinking about myself. So here's a good one. I have about 5 or 6 here. How did you come to the awareness that you didn't need to have, and when, weekly lessons anymore, and that you could become your own teacher and rely on yourself? I mean, do you have a memory of that, I guess? And then how did that process work inside?
There are several questions in your question. One is, when did you realize you didn't need to have a teacher? Second, when did you realize you didn't need to have lessons? And third, when did you realize you could rely on yourself? Each one of those could have a different answer.
Right. I mean, the reason I ask that is because, of course, anytime you ask a question, you have an experience. I'll just confess that I love having lessons. I loved having lessons with everybody, and there's positive and negative learning. It didn't matter. Just, I love to play, I love to get the reaction, and then I love not having to do the work myself, because you get all this wonderful, right? But my story, and I was just thinking about this, is, gee, I can't remember the year, but I had already left Indiana, and I used to go, I loved studying with George Shevlik, and every year he used to give a class somewhere in the West, and I remember going one year to McMinnville, Oregon. Not especially great place. And I just said, I'm going to be there. Can I play something? He said, sure. And so the class came, and I remember I played Bach bench suite, whatever. And he said, gee, I really enjoyed that. And I said, are you going to say anything? Like, and he said, yes, I have something to say to you. What is that? He said, I'm never going to give you a lesson again. You don't need any lessons, and you should stop doing this. That was my laugh. And it was like, whoo! He said, somebody needs to tell you this. But the truth of the matter was that when I was in the Chopin competition, I was much younger, and I think I needed a lot of lessons. Rubinstein sat me down and told me the same thing. And I thought, well, he's just saying that. But, so I needed a double dose. I needed the vaccine and the booster. So I would like to hear, I'm sure they would love to hear.
I had a similar experience, but I was much younger, and it was too early for me. But I had a very, very incredible pianist named Bruno Canino as a teacher back then. You probably are not aware of him, but he still plays a lot. He's in his 90s now.
Wow!
But he was very famous here in the US because he was playing with Itzhak Perlman as a duo, great teacher. But anyway, I was training when I was studying with him. He told me, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm young, I need to have lessons. But he wanted me to stop right there, but not because I didn't need lessons, but because he thought that you learn mostly actually when you understand that you can think about your things that you learn from your teachers by yourself. And so I didn't stop right then. But then for me it was natural when I started teaching. But I would love to have lessons, of course.
Okay, well, I had a natural break actually because I went straight from doctoral studies and I got my first job. And so when I got my job, it was apparent that I wasn't going to be having any more lessons after that point. But I remember going back, and this is a little bit opposite of Mr. Sheva, but Mr. Pressler, who I studied with at IU, I would go back to IU because my brother was still there, and I would go back every year and spend some time there. And he would always say, "So, when are you going to play for me?" And I just didn't want to. I thought he would tell me, "Wow, you haven't gotten any better in all these years."
Regress.
Yes, regress. But I also did enjoy sort of having the time to synthesize. I was forced to basically think on my own, and that was a struggle because I was always a very obedient student. I did everything my teachers asked me, and there was good things that came out of that. But I think it was important, and I studied with wonderful teachers, and I took different things from all of them, and I feel like that has become sort of my musical personality. And even though we studied with all the same teachers, his personality is different. And so it's, you take different angles of thoughts that come from your teachers and then make it go from there.
I don't know if you guys read the book by Leon Fleischer. Oh, I still catch my breath when I think he's no longer with us. But 9 Lives, the book is called. And if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to read it. It's a marvelous autobiography written with incredibly witty language of great men. And one particular episode struck me when Mr. Fleischer stopped having lessons with Schnabel. He was around 16 or 17. He was living in New York, I think, by himself in an apartment. And he was practicing and realizing he has no idea what to do. He would play something and kind of wait for somebody to tell him how to phrase that. And he described that feeling of incredible kind of disorientation, like, what do I do now? He was scared. And I think he contacted Schnabel and asked him to continue giving him lessons, and I think Schnabel refused. And I remember this episode where he describes when he finally sort of realized that he has to think about it himself, and he started thinking about it himself, and then he realized he could, after all, do all these things. He just didn't know he could. And that he describes as a pivotal moment in his development. It happened early for him. I also heard a similar story by Alexander Gavrilyuk, who you might or might not know about, but absolutely marvelous pianist, who actually had a slightly different experience. He realized himself at 18 that he does not need any more teaching. And he said that realization was very strong. He felt like any further teaching would actually harm rather than help. And so he stopped. And so I think what those two very different stories tell you is we actually all have it within us to be our own teachers. But I think we're, for the most part, don't know we're ready. There is this period of gestation where we are ready, and our teachers might know that, but we don't know it ourselves, and it takes a little while for us to come to that realization.
So one of the important points, I feel, of RPPF is to help you come to that juncture and take that road, because even if you can teach yourself, that doesn't mean you can't play for somebody else and get other ideas, right? But I was so incredibly moved 2 years ago by one of the, I think it's just extraordinary, talented person who was here, and we went all through this whole festival, and at the end, this person said, but how can I make my own interpretation? And I was like, oh my goodness, we're going through this again. So one of the interesting things that comes up is how do you stimulate your imagination when you're in the practice room? How do you guide yourself? When do you, in a sense, you have to turn off or turn down the voice of your teacher in order to turn up just a little bit your own voice? And so I want you all to try to experience that, and that's why I'm asking this question, because we have all been able to make that transition. Whether it's been a bumpy road, well, nothing is so smooth.
I'm still making that.
Well, I mean, you've heard about Matarvich still taking lessons after having become already a world-renowned superstar. And there is something to be said about continuing to take lessons, playing for other people and feeding off each other and so on. It's wonderful. But in my personal case, my experience was kind of traumatic, I would say, because I did not have a good teacher until I was 19 years old. And so I had to figure out stuff by myself, because I felt that if I stayed in that environment, and if I was forced to continue to stay there, but I just turned it off and went off my own path. And of course I crashed and burned many times, but it helped me. And then I had the outlet of chamber music where I was unsupervised. And it was meant to be that way because of the way the system worked where I was growing up. There was no chamber music course. I had like a ton of friends who played other instruments and asked me to accompany them. I was playing Frank Sinatra, it's not accompanying. But you know, to just support them in their recitals and things, and we would just be our own teachers. And again, you do it, you trial and error, and I stole from as many people as I possibly could. I went to every recital that I possibly could, and I even remember, this is pre-internet, I come from a relatively small town in southern Italy, so it's not that big cultural center. We didn't have many great artists coming all the time, but we did have some occasionally, and I would miss those so I could learn. And I would also go to the public library and try to get my hands on any recording I could get my hands on, and that was a great school of learning. And then finally, by sheer luck, when I was 19, I then stumbled upon a fantastic teacher. And but at that point, I had already learned how to like figure things out for myself, and I would only ever have lessons like once a month or so. But for everybody, it's different. But at some point, you do need a figure that you can really feel like it's your mentor, your guidance, and you know, that's important.
I think when you do that, you feel invincible. If you trust someone completely, like two of my teachers were like that. I knew that if there was no question whether to trust them or not. It was so close to my heart what they were trying to convey. And it did feel completely invincible. I felt that I could do anything, that I could do no wrong. Then, of course, the doubts come, and then it's very popular, I guess, nowadays to study with this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. And then very often I encounter the score, where I cannot see the text. You have green, you have red, you have yellow, you have blue, and there's so much written that you cannot see the notes. My teacher, when I was growing up, wouldn't allow me to write anything other than maybe occasional fingering. And so I asked once, I said, well, what does that mean? Oh, that's Professor Koblin. And what does the brown mean? Oh, that's the second lesson of Professor Koblin. Oh, and that Professor so-and-so, and that's Professor... And I said, well, and what do you want to say? And how can you, from that brew of stuff that you have on your page, where do you fit in? So I think it is important to not copy. It is important. There are so many ways that one can express oneself, and what we do, I think, is just expressing and sharing with others. And it's important that as each of us have our own. We all have our own voice, which is our voice. Maybe you guys have similar voices. but we do have our own voice, and it's the same with what we're trying to say. Because if there was only one way to do things, a computer would have been invented a long time ago, and there would be no need for us. And I think that as teachers, at least my job, I view my job as to make myself obsolete. And one of the greatest compliments I've ever heard from a student, he didn't mean it as a compliment. he meant it as a complaint that he didn't have enough time with me. He only studied with me for 1 year, then he went on to study with other people, other degrees, other schools. And then he told me, he said, once I was really lost, I didn't get the help, you were far away and you were busy, I didn't want to bother you, and I started thinking how to achieve what I want to achieve. And he said, I started going back through what we did in our lessons, and that was a path that I found myself. So when I heard that, I said, wow, I did my job. Yeah. So
Teach people how to learn. That's really the key.
I would like to add to that, and I think I really identify with what you're saying about I love having lessons. And I think we all crave lessons for one reason. Lesson is an exchange of energies. And when you have a presence in a room, that their sole purpose is to beam their energy and their creative force onto you and make you feel, play, sound, understand things better. It's a wonderful feeling. I mean, it's a little bit like drug. Actually, it's a lot like a drug. It's a very good feeling drug. And the reason we're so scared to let go of that drug, we're a little bit hooked on that. And then suddenly you don't have that feeder of energy that goes into you. And then comes a question, can I self-generate that?
You know, I have a slightly different idea about that recently, which is, you know, we all create our own reality. And the reason we can talk is because the realities that we create, that we project, are similar. So if we have that, if we see that energy from whatever teacher, you know, it goes both ways. It mixes up and it comes out. So I'm thinking about, you know, emphasizing more the idea that we create like a path, like a hallucination, like a fantasy. So really, we create a fantasy, a vision. So it goes when you watch television, you can like, or you go to the valley, you can get them. But instead of just sitting there, you know, it can go the other way. And that's the part that's so interesting about a festival like this. Because I'm hoping that the energy will come into you, and then in your practice room, you'll say, okay, I'm going to create this pathway. Whether it doesn't, it could be a mishmash of all things that were said to you. And it's that part that's, you know, usually, whether it was with Leon or whoever, it's frightening when you come with yourself alone. And it's, I think, a much gentler journey if you can start the process now. Open the door and go back and forth, because you will be going back and forth. This little road will become like a 4-lane highway eventually. But it has to be nourished, that process.
I'm already picturing new slogans. Don't do drugs, take a piano.
The best addiction.
So what are your questions?
This is just like my
You
student
know,
class.
something that we talked about, guys, it's, I think what is coming out of this is curiosity. And I have to say, I insist with my students, when I see that they don't have curiosity, it's frightening. You must, I mean, you need to have the desire to know things, and to what he was saying, like going and listen to CDs. Right now, it's so easy. You have an Access Music library. You don't have to go into libraries, or I remember my teacher would send me tapes, like audio tapes, dubbed from CDs, because I didn't have the money to buy CDs. Right now, it's much easier. So you need to have curiosity. The reason actually why I'm here in the United States is that 20 years ago, I heard about a great Italian pianist that had won a great international music competition, who is here to my side. And I wanted to emulate him. I heard about this, I read about this, and I said, wow, my God, I have to go to the United States. This guy has done this. Maybe I can have the same, no, I'm not going to win, but I'm going maybe to have the same experiences, to live the same experiences.
Guess what? He won.
And then, but But I mean, this drives you, and you have to find the strength, and in everything you do.
You know that when you grow up in a small place and you don't have the technology that you have today, I even had to sort of befriend or bribe the person who worked in the library to open the doors to this archive that they had of old recordings, and mostly it was LPs, not even cassettes. He would make a cassette for me to take home. This would be highly unlikely anywhere else. It's just because everybody knew each other, and so it's a small place, you can sort of ask for favors. And nowadays, you know, you have indications on a different language on a score. You can just Google Translate it very quickly. And that's why I get mad when my students don't know what the markings mean, because it costs nothing to really find out. And to listen to all, you know, the history of interpretation on one piece, you can find all on YouTube probably. And so forth. So curiosity, definitely. And you can satisfy that curiosity much easily. And also to find scores is no problem nowadays. Used to be a big problem.
And then I'm almost sure if we name some of the great pianists of the past, you may not know about them, which is a shame, I think, in my opinion. It's important that you know the tradition of where we come from, why we are here, and learn from the past so much. Some of my teachers were always constantly speaking about pianists who I never knew about, and so I was constantly checking on them. And maybe I hated them, but at the same time I knew about their interpretation and I was learning, even if I didn't like it, and going and finding my direction.
Well, two things. Do you all know what a tape is?
And sometimes we get jammed and we would use pencils to We used to have it in the cars. I have a 16-year-old daughter and she does not believe me when I tell her that I grew up without cell phones.
That's right.
So the ease of information, the ease of access to information sometimes leads to lack of
Curiosity.
Lack of aliveness.
Yeah.
Because here it is. It's instant. It's instant. And
You desire things that you cannot have way more. That's the
we
piece.
had to go 40 minutes in one direction, both ways uphill. But anyway, so the fact that it's so easy, and very often I encounter an answer like, "Did you hear anyone perform this piece?" "Yeah." "Who did you hear?" "YouTube." "Really?"
Yeah, they don't know the name of the performer sometimes.
Exactly.
Which is
No, especially you.
Which is, I completely agree with what Roberto said. There's such a treasure trove of things. And not just pianists. Not just pianists. You have to know what violin used to sound like before it became a perfect instrument. You know, you could just as pianists with violinists, you could hear two notes and you could say, "That's Michel, that's Tosha Zaidel, that's Heifetz." It was unmistakable sound, unmistakable personality. Just like you could say, "That's," I don't want to throw names at you, that might scare
Oh,
you,
that's
but-
somebody's signature.
Right.
It's your fingerprint.
And same with conductors. I mean, it's all part of our craft, our sort of cultural inheritance. And I think we owe to the ones who came before and who will come after to pass this on. And so we have to know this and not limit ourselves just with you know, the absolute necessity of what we are working at the moment. So that would be my strong suggestion to everyone.
So nobody has a question? Oh, there's somebody. Okay, we have some questions.
So on the topic of recordings and how there's so many available now, like, you know, there's a lot of interviews with like different really well-known pianists, and some people seem to be of the thought that like there's maybe too much access to recordings now, and like, you know, when you start learning a piece, what's the first thing we do now? We just go on YouTube and we listen to like a bunch, and that somehow like limiting our individuality or like creating a generic interpretation. I was wondering what your guys' thoughts on listening to recordings of pieces that you were learning right now.
What I always did when I was your age was listening before learning, but that was I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's what I did. I would listen to a performance before learning the piece. Then I would forget about the performance completely. I would learn the piece, and then just out of curiosity, I would go back and listen to the performance that I listened before learning the piece, which I loved at that time, and I would hate it.
Mm-hmm. That happened to me too.
Which means that then you found your own way and you dislike the other one.
But also it depends, because if you're learning something, let's say that you're learning a piece that's standard repertoire, you cannot escape the fact that you might have already listened to it 1,000 times even before you start learning it, regardless of whether you go and look for a recording or a set of recordings. If you're learning something you've never heard before, then it's a different process. Do you want to be looking at the score with completely fresh eyes and fresh ears when you start performing? There is a lot of fun to be had that way if you start exploring areas of the repertoire that are not very common, and that's another thing that at some point would be lovely for people to do more of. Especially, your age and as you get a little bit older. But I completely agree, when you are curious about a work, okay, let me go refresh my mind about this work that I'm about to learn, then maybe listen just to see if you really have that strong desire to learn it, and then forget about it. Just go about your own way to learn. Then you will have an exchange with your teachers or different teachers, and then you should ideally filter everything through your own eyes and ears, and then when you go back and listen to that recording that you might have liked before, I completely agree, every time it happens, like, I didn't remember this being so bad.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's not bad, it's just so different. Yeah.
I had the experience of owning for a few years the piano that Rachmaninoff recorded on one of these CMADs. And I totally agree with you, but so there's Mozart Sonata, and there was maybe slide that he recorded on it, and a few things, and I thought, oh, this is a unique opportunity because maybe I could learn those sounds and that inflection. I'm going to go and I'm going to copy exactly what he did, because these are wonderful recordings, and he was such a wonderful pianist. And I learned a ton about tone and texture because I had a piano that sounded just like him, even though he wasn't there. Too bad. And then when I finished this, I had this repertoire of color and different touches and textures. And no matter how much you try to play exactly like Boris or exactly like Rachmaninoff or exactly like whoever it is, it's not going to happen. Because it has to go through your...
But thank God.
Yeah, your energy. And so that was like a wonderful lesson for me, because you can come close. So, I would say to you, don't have the fear of having a generic interpretation just by listening. Your energy has to infuse the music. So if you just, if your performance or your interpretation isn't alive, that's because that part of the process that we've been talking about isn't yet working. So that's your struggle.
I also suggest that if you decide to listen to a recording of the piece you're about to play, or the piece that you're playing, listen to more than one. Because it's very easy to get so swept off your feet by something you really love, which may have some idiosyncratic approaches. One of my colleagues said there's no plagiarism in music, because you're the one who has to recreate it every time. However, you can be so influenced by some aspect of the performance that you want to copy it, and what ends up being is a caricature in most cases, because you can't do what Horowitz does, you can't do what Plessler does. And that it's a very fine balance. You have to take the music to the edge of what's permissible. If you cross to the other side, it begins to smell a little bit, and you end up with bad taste. But if you take it all the way up to that point, you have plenty of room to be creative, original, and so when you listen to more than one version, you may think, oh, wow, that phrase was spectacular. Why? What did I like about that? Oh, that rubato was fantastic. It gives you sort of a range of things to consider. And then you may want to do something that neither or no other performer did, just because you engage your creativity at that point already. So nothing wrong with listening, I think. But don't listen to Mr. YouTube, listen to that. There are so many, you click on a piece, and then of course on the right side you'll have a million other variants.
Oh, and another important piece of advice. Usually the videos with the sort of fewer amounts of likes are the ones you should watch. or a fewer amount of views, because otherwise you might easily run into somebody who is a YouTuber or a video sensation and not a reputable artist, or somebody who is dressed scantily, or somebody who is coloring their hair purple and or mimicking the silhouette of another. So you have so many ridiculous things and have millions and millions of views, and they all play the piece, and they play it very badly usually. But then you go and find the most magical performance of one of the greatest artists, be it Rubinstein or Cortot or anything, whatever we have. And then they have like 100 views, or maybe 1,000 if you're lucky, and those are the true treasures. So
yeah, and you have to be able to have your own judgment. I mean, to understand by yourself who is good, I mean, who is a true artist and who is a caricature, like what he's saying. And many times I have students who come to me and they ask me, is this a reputable artist? Should I listen to him or not? But they should not come to me. They should find on their own by researching and again having curiosity and finding on their own.
Yes.
I'm wondering if any of you have some sort of an epiphany that you've had multiple times throughout your life, or musical epiphany or otherwise. You've had many times.
It happens every day.
Yeah.
I was just trying to understand the question, because an epiphany is not something that you want one specifically that has reoccurred.
Yeah, well, yeah, it could be one that's reoccurred. Yeah, something that you rediscover again.
Or that it's confirmed, you mean?
Sure, yeah.
So like something that you realize all of a sudden, and then it's being confirmed as you age and as you go on in life.
Yeah.
Well, this might be the most obvious, and it also already transpired from what we already talked about, but that there is, well, maybe two things. First, that there is really no better teacher than ourselves. And this does not come from a place of arrogance, but it comes from the fact that you have to filter everything, and then you have to have the rigorous self-critical side to be your own teacher. And then the other one is, what I consider a truism, is that no matter who you are as a teacher, no one can teach you to be a performer. You have to perform in order to learn that aspect of what we do. You have to be on the stage. And that has been confirmed to me every day.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I used to have what I call them light bulb moments, but I think that's what you mean, this aha moments that come. And it's interesting that I didn't have them when I was a student. I would diligently do the work and be a really good student, do everything that was expected of me, but I just sort of worked and things happened. But then when I started teaching, I got really obsessed for a while with finding the best way to convey to my students how to practice. And I kept searching for this philosopher's stone of way, like this one phrase or this one concept. And I would have these light bulbs probably once a year, and I would get all excited about them. And it would usually happen in the summer when I would be on my own practicing and actually getting in shape. And I was like, yes, this is working. I must tell all my students. This is the way. And some year it was a slow practice, some year it was a staccato practice, some year it was something else practice. So I would then go back and my poor kids, I would subject all of them to the same thing. And I'd be so convincing they would all get on the wagon. And we would have a nice ride for a while. And then things would become like they would start fraying around the edges, and then this aha moment would just kind of fade away. And I was like, what happened? You know, it's working. And then a realization dawned on me that, and that was a true epiphany, that there are no aha moments in music. There are no shortcuts. There is not one way, one magical way, and if you go that way, everything will just work out. There is none of that. There is just work. And a lot of it is drudgery, actually. A lot of it is just getting yourself, flopping yourself in a practice room, and doing the work. And then when I realized that something happened, everything became simpler. You just do the work, you don't expect miracles. If you do the work consistently, you put in this amount of capital and it grows interests. Not today, not tomorrow, but in a year, in 2 years, and then forever. And that was my true aha moment.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and combining what Marina and Antonio said, you find this maybe in the practice room, but then you have to bring it on stage. What I see, for instance, some master students that come, and I'm new to the American system. In Europe, everything is different. But what I don't find healthy is, for instance, master students who come to me, and from the first lesson, they told me, I want to build a great doctoral audition program. From the first, I mean, we don't even know each other, and you're thinking to the doctoral program, which is coming in 2 years. Which means that for the next 3 years, you're forgetting about your public life as a performer. This is not healthy at all. And it means also that you're focusing on one program in 2 years, which is not possible.
You know, growing up in California, which was when I was growing up a million years ago, California was kind of out there. There weren't very many schools, and everybody had private teachers, and the idea that, you know, from day one when you enter university that you're going to be focused on what you're going to play for your jury, and you pick up your jury program, and that's it. I mean, I was so shocked when I came east. That was like a different thing. But of course, I wasn't a kid anymore. But I loved the idea that you could go to your piano lesson, or in my case, I was also studying composition with Leonard Stein, and it was like an adventure. I mean, you didn't have to just think about, okay, I have to play this piece in April or May or whatever it is. So the whole idea of allowing your imagination out and exploring repertoire that was related, or maybe learning 2 Schumann pieces at the same time, I felt that was such a benefit. And I was honored that I was able to be part of that old system instead of all the tests and exams and the straitjacket that now we find ourselves.
I mean, tests and exams are important, but the school where you're in is not your ward. Your ward will be after you go out from school. And the moment you go out from school, that's the scariest moment ever, because you're not protected anymore. And even if this is what we do is a wonderful art, our world is very hard and difficult. And I don't want to scare you, but this is a very hard profession that you're getting in. So it's very important that you are ready from your school days, and you don't think that the school is protecting you and it's your whole world. The world is outside the school, which means that you have to go outside the school and prove yourself so that you will be ready when you exit from school.
Yes.
Do you have any moments that you still remember today where you were really stuck, you know, as a student, either as a student or after you graduated college, as a professor, whenever? Do you have a moment that you remember to this day? And how you got through it, maybe?
Well, we had a similar experience. It's no surprise there. When we were grad students doing our masters, and we had a teacher who we admired and loved, but he wasn't in the best health, and so for the last year, he wasn't teaching. And he had 7 assistants, and all of his students were farmed out to various assistants, but for some reason my brother and I were not assigned to any assistant. And they didn't realize that we had not been assigned, and we didn't know that we were supposed to be assigned. So we just practiced on our own. We prepared our graduation recital on our own. We played for each other pretty much every day. And we kind of lost a bit of our way because we were just confused about what was happening. And we were going to start studying the following fall, doing doctoral work with Pressler. And I remember that we did our graduation recital in April, and we just stopped practicing. We didn't play. We played for people's juries, but we were just so. It was not a good situation, and I remember thinking we went through the summer without practicing, and we started doctoral work, and Pressler had already told us that he was not going to be in school until the middle of September because of his tour, so we knew we had a month to practice when we got to IU, and we frantically practiced.
That's the only thing you can do.
Yeah. It's gotten better.
Well.
But I think what sort of sparked us again was this enormous musical, and I don't know how to describe Pressler in a way that encompasses everything that he meant.
He's a whirlwind.
Yeah.
And also so full of sunshine. I
Exactly.
mean, I used to go to the music building at 7:30 when he was there. He was just whistling and happy, and I mean, he loved going to his studio, close the door, and then he would practice. It was just like, it was like the sun coming out.
Well, and he would get there
It's just wonderful.
7:30.
Yeah.
I had an 8 o'clock a.m. lesson every week that he was there. And I was the only one who apparently agreed to take the 8 a.m. lesson, so every time he would say, and I'm back in 3 weeks, you'll have an 8 a.m. lesson on Tuesday, you have an 8 a.m. lesson on Friday, and you have an 8 a.m. lesson on Sunday. And I remember him, saying, Sunday, I said, well, it is Easter. And he said, well, what time do you go to church? I said, well, 11. I said, you could do an 8. But it was just sort of that, we were kind of beaten down by New York. I don't think that we were necessarily the best personalities to live in New York. And the environment just wasn't healthy for us. And just going to lessons with Pressler, and he was just irrepressible.
So it was like an infection of everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
It was just so
I never had a teacher who raised his voice as loudly as he could and say very harsh things. But it was never to beat me down, and I never felt, every time I left the studio, I always felt like I can do what he's asking me to do, because he's telling me all this stuff. He wouldn't be telling me this stuff unless he thought I could be
He
doing
was
it.
only mad because it wasn't serving the music, whatever it was. It wasn't being mad at the student himself or herself.
It took me like several years after, but I think that what I finally distilled it down to is that music meant so much to him that he just couldn't understand how I wasn't feeling the same way. And every note, every interval, why is C sharp here? I don't know. But he would ask these questions, and he would ask you to feel them, to think about it, and it's just really extraordinary. 98.
Yeah, and he is attending, so we did all the faculty meetings online, of course, last year. He never missed one.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Going to your question of getting stuck, I think everyone gets stuck. Only those don't get stuck who don't do anything. So it's normal, and sometimes you feel like You beat your head against the wall and nothing seems to progress. Walk away. Walk away. Go take a walk, have a beer, do whatever.
Okay, so I know you touched on this a little bit about kind of general advice that's been touched on it, but I was wondering, so now that we're obviously in the 21st century, there's this whole explosion of social media, of platforms, of YouTube, Facebook, all sorts of ways people advertise themselves, and also this kind of information overload for older audiences, younger audiences, and also people our age. So I was kind of wondering general advice to people who are growing up in this time, kind of thinking out there in the world. I guess advice that is applicable to our times now with all of these new innovations that are coming.
But I think that, you know, there is one thing that I think we all can agree on, that what we do hasn't changed. I mean, the world changes, but our mission, the passion that we have for music and the mission that we have to share it with as many people as possible, be it in the format of teaching or performing, or that hasn't changed, and the process hasn't changed, because as Marina was saying before, there are no shortcuts. So the only thing that social media could do is could be a positive and a negative. The negative is certainly that the attention span of people has shortened considerably. It used to be that I believe that the average adult person now has the attention span that used to be that of a child a few years ago. And that is attributable, I think, at least in part, if not in large part, to social media. The other thing is quality control. It's positive that now people who are born in remote corners of the world can have access to this treasure trove of information and even lessons, master classes online and recordings. But at the same time, they can also spur people to want to become a celebrity the wrong way. And celebrity is already a bad word for it, but just to become a star, to become well known at all costs. So regardless of what the process should be, and regardless what the quality of what we do should be, and so on. And then the fact that they know that they might have an audience, because there is an audience out there who doesn't really know the difference. So I guess it comes down to what you really want to do. If you feel passion, if you know that you need to do certain things at a certain level in order to fulfill that passion and that mission, then social media exists or not exists, it will be the same to you. That's what I believe.
Yeah, and since you're, of course, much better than us with technology and everything, because you were born with it, you should try to find a way to use technology for your own good. And for instance, you know, it's very easy to put up a website by yourself, not using PHP language, but just, I mean, there are providers who can help in doing websites. How many of you, can I ask you, please raise a hand, how many of you does have a website? It's not enough, guys. It's probably
It's already passed.
I know, but it's still, even if you think it's past and that you think that social media can replace a website, it's what probably presenters will go and visit in order to listen to you. Maybe the website can have a YouTube channel, or at least a YouTube channel.
You all have a YouTube channel, right?
Probably. Do you list your performances there? Do you put your performances there? The YouTube channel doesn't have your biography, so a presenter maybe need to ask you to send them a biography or a photo, a press photo or something. You know, a website, even if it's old, it's still where you may find the most information. I mean, a good number of information that can help for your career. So at our age, I mean, when we were students, I remember I was making cassettes and sending cassettes and this was expensive also, because I had to pay for these cassettes to be sent. Right now it's easier. And something that can help you in making a career is making performances. So either attending competitions or finding ways to perform.
And also not only just the old way of performing, you just go and perform. I mean, it's just like
new ideas.
New ideas. How are you going to combine aspects of your education, aspects of your own vision, and aspects of how you want the world to be? How is the world going to survive? Are we going to, maybe you want to combine poetry and music and climate change or whatever, but there's got to be this way forward, and you are the people that are going to create this path.
Yeah,
for the future. Well, I mean, we're still trying, but I mean, you're the young energy.
And projects also.
Yes.
Creating a brand or a special project for an idea that you have. And all of us, we have special connections with somebody. For instance, I rediscovered this old Italian composer that nobody heard about, and I discovered that Mozart wrote a cadenza for him. And I did it actually online. I visited the Mozarteum website, and I remember I was in my kitchen instead of washing dishes. I decided, no, I have to look into the Mozarteum website and find, because somebody told me that this composer, Lucchesi, had written a concerto for which Mozart had written a cadenza. And I wanted to find out. So I went on the Mozarteum website. I looked for the cadenza score. There's 2 volumes with cadenzas written by Mozart for his own concertos and for other concertos. I found one little page, and the title was Cadenza written by Mozart for an unknown concerto. I looked at the score, and it was exactly the theme of the concerto by Lucchesi that I was going to record, and I found it online. But just because I wanted to create this special project, so of course we can all play.
Just a little bit variation to that. You know, one of the things we're going to do here next week, I think it is we are bringing in a live composer. He really writes, and you are going to each be having a piece of his. There's 7 pieces. Each of you will get one of his pieces. They're short. They have not been recorded. You cannot go to YouTube to find it. And, you know, a couple of minutes each, but the whole idea is, here's the composer, here's the music. What do we do now? I mean, it's just, I feel like it's so important to be connected to what is being written now, and maybe it will help you to improvise or compose. So that's, you're going to get an injection of this living in process.
And just, you know, I was talking about before, like exploring areas of the repertoire that are not well known. I mean, it's true that, like some people say, well, some things are not well known because they probably don't deserve to be known. And I don't dispute that that may be the case, but there is also a lot of cases when it's not true. Mm-hmm. And so, just like the case of Lucchesi, for example, but for example, I remember sometimes presenters resist when you want to play something different, when you want to do something that nobody does, because they're afraid audience is not going to show up, because they're going to look at the program. So it's up to you to convince them it's not so. And it's up to you through your playing, but also through your advocacy and talking, etc. I remember there used to be a publisher named Musica Obscura. It doesn't exist anymore. And this, again, pre-internet, pre-IMSLP, and I'm not talking about 60 years ago, I'm not that old, but the thing is, this was 2002 or 3. Anyway, I had to buy half of their catalog, spending a lot of my money just to be able to look at those scores, because I couldn't even find those scores in libraries. And the books that arrived were basically printouts with like binding that was miserable, but they cost a lot of money. And so there was a pile this tall, and I started at home going through them until I found what I wanted to play. And then I had to fight for 2 months to be able to perform it in Carnegie Hall. And I had to make some other concessions in order to be able to keep the things that I really wanted to keep. But in the end, I got a beautiful review, and specifically on that repertoire that the presenter initially did not even want. So it's up to you, but of course you got to get passionate. If you don't love what you play, you cannot just pick something because nobody else has done it. You just have to also feel the passion for it, but it's worth it.